Hey there, everyone. We've got something a little different for you today. What I'm going to be doing is sharing an extract from a speech I gave at a conference a couple of years ago. And so, what you're about to hear is me talking a little bit about the idea of gateways and transitions. And I'm going to talk about the signs of Cancer and Capricorn as I do that. And you'll find out why as you listen forward. And I'm also going to share a little bit about some personal experiences I've had with this concept or idea of gateways and transitions. So, the video or the recording that you're about to listen to was recorded live in 2019. And you'll hear me sharing about 10 minutes from a longer 60-minute speech. I hope it's interesting. I hope it's thought provoking for you. And if you would like to hear the whole speech, the recording is available for purchase and download. And the link where you can find that is in the show notes below. So enjoy. This is a very simple depiction of the Thema Mundi, which is known as the birth chart of the world. It's not actually meant to be the birth chart of a physical thing. It's designed as a teaching tool, which helps illustrate quite a number of concepts that are core to our astrological doctrine. There's a few things missing. I left the planets out because today I just want to speak to the sign arrangement. One of the things that we notice in the Thema Mundi chart is that the sign of Cancer is placed in the ascendant or the first house position. And so what we have here is that they place Cancer in the part of the chart associated with the rising sun, with East, which has long been associated with this idea of birth or new life. And similarly, we see Capricorn in the seventh associated with West, which the ancient Egyptians thought had to do with death or decline. So again, we get this repetition of the passage of time being described through Cancer and Capricorn, with birth and beginnings being linked to Cancer and death and endings being linked to Capricorn. Cancer essentially represents that flush and that promise of new life, while Capricorn shows the wisdom and experience of age. It also highlights, of course, this importance of departures and transitions. Together, these two signs describe a really essential gateway process. Now, the challenge with a gateway is that you always know what's ending and what you have to give up. Since I've started thinking about 2019 and 2020 as gateway years or as portals, I now see this as a really special time where we're each invited to end things and create conscious closure in at least one core area of our life. Now, the thing about any ending or departure is it usually triggers quite a lot of loss or emotion, like grief. When you're dealing with grief, you know what you've lost. You've lost a person or a partnership, a pathway, a set of possibilities, maybe even a career. What you don't know and what you can't know is what you might gain. And that's why these gateways, these transition times, feel so scary and so fearful. William Bridges, an English professor, wrote a really interesting book called Transitions, which has become a psychological classic on change. He writes that every transition begins with an ending and ends with a beginning. So when something ends or departs from your life, you've had it, you've known it, you've lived it, you've given your time, your energy, and your presence to this thing. Whether it was a relationship, a job, a career, a particular home that you loved living in. It's been a touchstone that you have used, maybe unconsciously, to cue your behavior and spark your feelings and your thoughts. You've given your attention to it, your time, your energy. In its absence, there's a void, an emptiness, a nothingness. Without this thing that's departed your life, you will feel for a while like you don't know who you are. You might no longer have that familiar touchstone and you might struggle with things to do with identity or even simple stuff like everyday routine. This process reminds me of the cycle of the seasons, which themselves include periods of nothingness, quite extreme nothingness if you happen to live in the northeast like I do in Ontario. How many people have to deal with those crazy types of winters? Yeah, so you guys know exactly how empty that period can be. However, spring always follows winter. And so after these periods of nothingness, we do go into a period where there is growth and blossoming and progress. The seasonal period includes these deep winters, if you like, when the trees bear no leaves, no flowers, and no fruit, where they're just holding steady, kind of hibernating. They're conserving their energy until the familiar touchstones of sunshine and heat return to cue their behavior. The nature of growth is that the old must go first. We then have to find the strength to sit in the in-between, in that awkward nothingness. We have to be okay with the emptiness. Bridges describes this in-between as the most uncomfortable part of any type of transition or change. And it's the part that most of us actually try to rush forward through. But he does say that this neutral zone where nothing appears to be happening, at least externally, this period after the ending, but before you get to the beginning, he says that is actually where all the growth happens. He says everything feels up for grabs and you don't quite know who you are or how you're supposed to behave. It can be really scary to not know what will step in to fill that void, and it can be especially unsettling for our human brains to not know when something will step in to fill that void. But if you could be curious about what might come in, you might find that your attitude to things ending actually changes. So I've had two what I would call gateway years in my personal life. Each of these years has brought themes of death and departure, as well as renewal and new life. There's been years of major endings, as well as dramatic new beginnings. The first one was when I was 6. We'd been living in Fiji due to my dad's job, and his contract was up. The company he was working for had to find a new position for him elsewhere in their organisation, and they'd kind of forgotten about him just working over in Fiji because the company was based in Australia. So there was a bit of a mad scramble to find a place to slot him in. But eventually they did find a suitable position for him elsewhere, and that role ended up being in Sydney, which was a city that neither of my parents had ever lived in. So we moved to Sydney, and shortly after we moved there to start our new life, my mother died after a short battle with cancer. This period in my life was like many transitions all at once. Practically, for the first time, I remember being very cold. Up until that point, I'd lived in tropical climates in Brisbane and then in Fiji. So the chilly, damp cold of Sydney in the wintertime was quite the shock. I remember walking to school in my school uniform because we wear uniforms to school in Australia. And I remember my hands being so cold that my fingers got blisters on them from the chill. Emotionally, while the move, of course, was a big thing to process, it was something we'd done before, and so I was a little more familiar with that. The bigger emotional loss, of course, was that of my mother dying. That itself was the most significant event in my childhood. There's the who I was before, the path that I may have taken, and there's everything that came afterwards. It took me years to process the many layers of change this one event triggered, from the immediate change in family dynamics, with me as the older sibling helping out with my 2 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters, to the emotional adjustments that I made without even realizing about how to be more self-reliant, more responsible. It also triggered this extremely protective feeling inside me towards my siblings that I've learned as an adult is far stronger than typical sibling bonds usually are. And when I tell this story, people often say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's really sad," or "How tragic." And it was a tragedy, especially for my dad, who wasn't yet 40, but who would bury his wife before his youngest child turned 1. For my siblings, some of whom were so young that they would never have any memories of their mother. It's almost impossible to sum up the many ways that the gateway of death can change a person, but I know personally that while gateway years might define you, they don't have to break you. Losing my mother is a part of me. It's not so strange, really. Most of us will bury our parents at some point. It was just a gateway that I personally went through a little earlier than most. Losing my mother when I was 7 shifted the essence of me. It shaped who I am. It taught me how to walk forward with grief. I learned firsthand that grief was something that you can move forward carrying. I've been up close and personal with the waves of grief and emotion and sadness that can rise up like a tsunami years after the fact and suck you down. While that might sound intense and hard, because it is, and any of you who have dealt with death or grief will know exactly what I'm talking about, The fact that I have walked through this particular gateway means that I now know a way through and I can help guide other people. Anything that you live through that you can take in and integrate into the very belly of your being, you can become a lived example of how to navigate that specific gateway for other people. You can become a lighthouse or a beacon of light for someone else who's behind you on the same gateway transition. Even after the rough landing I had in settling into Sydney, it did become home, and it's the city that I dream about now when I think about my childhood and about growing up.